Now recently I made a video saying who my favourite character from each season of The Walking Dead was. So today I thought we'd do the total opposite of that video and say who my least favourite character from every season of the show is. But as many of you so rightly pointed out, I should only be able to choose a character once, as my last video like this was of course dominated by the brilliance of Rick Grimes. And this also means I can't pick Andrea for the first 3 seasons of the show. So with that being said, let's get straight into the list. Now, Season 1 is probably the hardest season in the entire show to pick out a singular character who's bad, because quite frankly, everyone is A, superb in this season, and B, it's the shortest season in the entire show, coming in at only 6 episodes. And plus, most of the screen time is dedicated to purely Rick. Now, obviously, a character like Ed Peltier is extremely unlikable, but that's what he's designed to do. It doesn't make him a quote-unquote bad character because you as the audience are meant to dislike him, and the same goes for Merle. So who is my pick for Season 1 then? Well, kind of by default, it has to be Jackie. I'm so sorry, but there is literally no one else I could really choose. She barely gets any screen time or lines, and also decides to die alongside Dr. Jenner at the CDC. Now, I'm only choosing her because I feel like the writers could have fleshed her out a little bit more. Of course, this is nitpicking, but I did really enjoy her friendship with T-Dog. But that being said, Jackie is kind of done dirty by the writers. We don't really know her or have any backstory, so by default, she is my pick for Season 1. There are more than double the episodes in Season 2, coming in at an episode count of 13, and this is arguably the most character-driven season of the entire show, meaning we delve into a lot of the characters' mindsets, motivations, and their backstories, and I for one absolutely love this season of television. But again, the cast is super strong here. That being said, T-Dog, although being a really interesting and funny character, kind of gets thrown to the wayside in Season 2. I mean, it's almost like the writers had no idea what to do with his character. He's present in a lot of the scenes, but doesn't really say or do anything in them. Beth Green is also kind of annoying in this season with the whole berating of Laurie for being pregnant, and Carl kind of got on my nerves in Season 2, and he does of course inadvertently get Dale killed. But ultimately, the worst character in Season 2 for me is Laurie Grimes. Again, the fanbase has always been quite vocal about their dislike for the character of Laurie, and although I do think she's not nearly as bad as people make out, she is one of the more infuriating characters in Season 2. Firstly, she pits Rick and Shane against each other and is a large reason that their friendship breaks apart and turns deadly. Shane wanted to leave the group, but Laurie convinces him to stay. She then speaks to Rick in their tent and asks him if he'd kill the living to protect what's his, heavily implying she's talking about Shane. She also straight up tells Rick that Shane is a problem, and also is very vocal about being pregnant but not knowing who the father of the baby is. She also goes to try and find Herschel, Rick and Glenn, and flips one of the group's only functional cars, nearly getting herself killed, and one of her main jobs is looking after Carl. But in almost every scene, Carl is anywhere but where he's supposed to be, whether it's him playing with walkers in the woods, or stealing a gun and running off, or, and probably the worst, sneaking out at night watching his dad kill Shane in the zombie apocalypse. Seriously, if you were a mother in a zombie apocalypse, you would keep your eyes on your child at all times, but Laurie never seems to know where Carl is. He's just constantly running off, causing absolute mayhem, and it's quite concerning. So although you could argue that Shane and Rick's legendary dynamic is caused directly by Laurie, that still doesn't save her for me, as she is just in general rather annoying in Season 2. So for me, that's why she's the worst, well, technically second worst in Season 2, but we will get onto that. After the fall of the farm, our group seek refuge inside a prison, and all seems to be going well until our group run into the governor and the Woodbury community. Now this again is an extremely character-driven season of television, but I think we all know who my pick is here, so I'll just get straight into it. Andrea is probably the worst character in Season 2 and 3. Just backtracking a little bit, she shoots Daryl at the farm, has this whole prolonged and rather unnecessary conflict with Dale throughout Season 2, and on the whole is just a pretty annoying character. But in Season 3, she amps this right up. Andrea is the definition of sitting on the fence. She couldn't pick a side to save her life, and I mean that in quite frankly the most literal sense. I mean, one minute the writers want us to believe that she's this independent survival expert, taking down walkers with ease and leading Woodbury, but the next minute she's bumbling around, getting manipulated by the governor and is unable to kill the reanimated Milton. It's such a shame because there is so much potential with the character of Andrea, as I did talk about in my last video, but the writers just do her so dirty. She totally disregards Michonne in this season, ultimately choosing Woodbury and the governor over her own friend, who also saved her life, and she ignores every possible red flag with the governor up until her death pretty much. She had so many opportunities to escape or change sides, but ultimately this never happens, and her death felt so avoidable and was largely down to the character's incompetence rather than any good writing. By the time she does try and make an escape, it's kind of half-hearted and is far too late. So for me, Andrea is so infuriating and her decisions just baffle me throughout seasons 2 and 3. So yeah, Andrea has to win the award of the worst character in season 3. Now season 4 ramps up the difficulty tenfold because I don't think there's a character that stands out as being the definitive worst in the season. After the fall of the prison, our group split up into smaller groups, therefore meaning we get to see dynamics that we'd not seen in the show thus far. Some of my personal favourites include Beth and Daryl, Carol and Tyrese, and of course Rick and Michonne. Now a lot of people would be quick to say Tara's the worst character in this season, however I actually think in season 4 she's pretty good. We see her and Glenn form an unlikely friendship, she offers us some comedic relief throughout the episodes, and we see her battle with the guilt of fighting alongside the governor. So for this season, this may be an unpopular opinion, but I'm going to have to give the worst character from season 4 to Carl Grimes. Okay, hear me out. Carl takes a huge leap forward in season 3, especially towards the latter half of it, but although there is definitely moments he shines in season 4, like his friendship with Michonne and his love for Judith, there is about an 8-episode stretch through the mid-section of the season that I find him unbearable. Carl's constant dismissal and belittling of Rick gets old extremely fast. Like yeah, Rick just wanted to grow some veg and take a break from all the killing. Can you really blame him? Also, his attitude of constantly thinking he knows what's best and not listening to others is just annoying. Like, Carl buddy, you're 14 years old, please relax. And overall, he's just cocky, arrogant and kind of annoying. However, after Rick does bite a man's throat out to save him, I think he realises that he needs to start winding his neck in a bit. But look, after saying all that, you guys must think I hate Carl, but not at all. I think he's an amazing character and I love his development throughout the show. And for season 4, it's kind of the same as season 1. There's not actually anyone who stands out as being the definitive worst in this season. Because quite frankly, I do think everyone is brilliant throughout season 4. And although in my opinion Carl's behaviour does get old extremely quickly, I don't actually think it's bad writing. After all, he's a kid who's grown up in the chaotic world of the apocalypse. Of course he'd be desensitized and a little bit cocky, because he's a product of his environment. And I think the episode after shows us he's finally starting to realise that he can't just survive all by himself. So although I think Carl's probably the worst character in season 4, I also think it was a pivotal and probably necessary season for the character's overall development. Season 5 is what many fans would call the absolute pinnacle of The Walking Dead, and although it is one of the best seasons in television history, there are actually a couple of contenders for the worst character here. Firstly, Gabriel. I get that his whole shtick is he's cowardly and meant to show us just how much our group has changed since the start of the outbreak, but he is so frustrating to watch. The constant whining, the lack of competence, and then to have the audacity to backstab Rick and co, calling them evil to Diana after they saved you from a bunch of bloodthirsty cannibals is just wild. And again, I know Gabriel's meant to be unlikable in season 5, but he's more than unlikable, he is downright infuriating. Nicholas, again, his character is designed to be dislikable, but deserves a mention here, purely for getting Noah killed. The death of Noah is one of the biggest wastes of potential in the entire show, and it still baffles me as to why they made this decision. but my pick for Season 5's worst character is Dawn. The whole Grady Memorial storyline feels like a complete waste of time to me, and its only purpose is to seemingly give us a shocking character death, that being Beth Green. As all characters involved in this storyline would be dead before the end of the season. That's how pointless it is, and at the centre of this pointless storyline is Dawn. She's not really a stereotypical villain. She kind of just lets terrible things happen under her leadership, but she convinces herself that she's keeping order and peace. But in reality, she is one of the weakest leaders in the whole show. Dawn has this very cold and robotic feel to her, which makes her as a character feel not just unlikable, but boring. She's not intimidating or any real threat to our group, she's just kind of there being this obstacle that's not letting Beth and Noah leave. I'd probably go as far to say she is one of, if not the worst quote-unquote villains in the show. And the whole system of her going out and finding injured people and then enslaving them within the hospital whilst they work off their debts is just an utterly baffling survival tactic that to this day I've never really understood. And the only real part I like about this storyline is the moral dilemma it poses to our group when they capture some of Dawn's officers. And that is about it. Dawn just comes across as a weak and pretty forgettable obstacle in our group's journey. She's bland, a massive hypocrite, and she killed Beth. So for that reason, Dawn is the worst character in Season 5. Season 6 is a slow-burning, tense build-up to the Saviour War, mixed in with some high-action episodes, such as No Way Out. Nicholas again in this season is a pretty woeful character, as his somewhat redemption arc was all for nothing as he takes his own life, and in a season crammed full of characters I can't help but think this screen time would have been better delegated to another character. The Wolves as a group are worth a mention here as well, due to the fact that they were so disappointing. They had no clear motivations, and were dealt with within a few episodes, despite all the hints to their existence in the previous episodes. But the winner of the worst character in Season 6 for me is Ron. He is ultimately just a whiny kid without the redeeming factors that Carl had in the earlier seasons. He flip-flops throughout Season 6 from bonding with Carl to then wanting to kill him. Like seriously, this cycle happens about 6 times. And I get it, Rick killed his dad, but the character had such shallow motivations. The show never really explores his grief in any meaningful way. He decides his best port of call is to shoot Rick Grimes whilst they are trying to slip through a horde of walkers unnoticed. Like, what even is that plan? His whole character arc was built up for him to finally snap, and the conclusion we got was he pulls a gun and immediately gets eaten by walkers accidentally shooting Carl. I mean, it was over in seconds, and the whole thing feels like the writers just wanted Carl to get shot in the eye and needed someone disposable to do it. Again, Ron could have made an interesting character had the writers taken a bit more time to flesh him out, and explored his grief and trauma, and also his hatred towards Rick, because it kind of just goes from 0 to 100 within a matter of minutes. And although No Way Out is one of the best episodes in the entire show, Ron as a character certainly could have been done a lot better in my opinion. Because on paper, this kid has had his dad killed by a man who then starts sleeping with his mother, and if that's not bad enough, the man's son then proceeds to steal your girlfriend. Hell, I'd probably pull a gun on Rick in the middle of a horde if he'd done that to me. But my point is, the character has obviously been through a hell of a lot, and I just wish they'd explored it more, rather than glossing over it and having him do what was essentially a suicide mission in trying to kill Rick in that specific moment. However, it did make for great television. But yeah, that for me is why Ron is the worst character in Season 6. In the aftermath of the lineup, we see our group's morale crushed to an all-time low, as they debate whether or not to fight back against the Saviours. This season has a couple of annoying characters in it though. Firstly, Gregory. Every scene he's in, it feels like I'm watching a play or a sitcom. The vibe totally shifts when he's on screen, and although he is meant to be this comical coward, and on paper I like the concept of the character, I just don't think it really works for me. Now, I will probably get cooked for saying this, but Eugene is just annoying in Season 7. And if I'm perfectly frank, he's probably the most overrated character in the entire show, but I'll have a whole separate video coming out about that soon. So save your hate comments, Eugene fans, and let's get back on topic. Look, I get the decision to switch over to the Saviors is well in his character, because he's weak and will do anything to survive. And I also get that this moment sets up redemption for Season 8, and a full circle moment in Season 11. But for me, Eugene just doesn't work in Season 7. But the worst character in Season 7 for me is Jadis, / Anne, whatever the hell you want to call her. Jadis as a character in Season 7 just doesn't really make sense to me. Firstly, the scavengers as a group are just weird. They live in a literal dump, they are robotic, and they speak in this broken English. Like the outbreak only happened 2 years ago. How / why are they speaking like this? It's never explained. They clearly understand English. So it just feels like this cheap gimmick to try and make the group stand out. I mean, that's literally the only thing I can think of as to why they do this. There's also the inconsistencies of the scavengers and, more accurately, Jadis. One moment she's helping Rick, then she's betraying him, then she wants to strike up a new deal. It's all very confusing, and the group has no long-term plan or strong ideology. It just feels like they do whatever they do because the plot needs it. On top of this, Jadis has no backstory or depth until Season 9, where she is luckily saved by the CRM storyline, giving her some much needed development. But up until that moment, throughout Seasons 7 and 8, she just feels like a tool to complicate the story, rather than a real character. Jadis could have been so cool. Like, imagine if we'd met Jadis and the Trash People and they'd had their own code and they'd been fleshed out, and we'd learnt why they speak in broken English and why they even live in the rubbish dump in the first place. But instead, they come across as gimmicky, underwritten, and just extremely annoying. And Jadis is the leader of this group, so by default, she is the worst character in Season 7 for me. Season 8 shows us the fierce battle between our group and the Saviors, and this is a season rich in character development. Gabriel, Dwight, and Ezekiel all come on leaps and bounds throughout Season 8. But as for the worst characters, Tara becomes driven by rage, and her whole storyline throughout Season 8 was just unneeded, as she seeked revenge against Dwight. Morales returns for about 5 minutes before being killed by Daryl, which seems like such a waste of an OG character, but the worst character in Season 8 for me is again a controversial one. Now, this has nothing to do with Lenny James's performance, but rather the material he's given, and that is, of course, Morgan Jones. He just bounces between this Zen monk mode where all life is precious and doesn't want to hurt a fly, to a I don't die psycho killing everybody in his path. There is literally no in between for Morgan. He goes from extreme to extreme, and honestly, it was an interesting concept at first, but by Season 8 it just becomes so boring. They recycle the same storyline over and over again with this character, and they even had the audacity to put him in Fear the Walking Dead and still repeat the same cycle. Season 8 of the show starts to hint towards the rebuilding of society based on Carl's dying wishes, and the battle of morality in this increasingly brutal world. And although Rick does have that one scene in the bar where he does cross the line killing those saviors, Morgan crosses said line basically every single episode. He just runs around talking to dead people, stabbing prisoners, and just basically being a lunatic. His character feels tonally out of sync with the rest of the cast, and it's like the writers had no idea what to do with him, so they wrote him out the show by making him run halfway across America and made him join Fear the Walking Dead. And it really pains me to say, because I am a huge fan of Morgan's character up until Season 7. But after everything he's been through, Dwayne, Eastman, the Wolves, and then the Saviors, he still ends up in the same mental state as we saw in Season 3, essentially meaning his character goes nowhere. So yeah, for me, Morgan Jones is the worst character in Season 8, as it felt like we just saw the same rehashed storyline, and then they made him leave. Season 9 gives us a huge time jump, and we see that all the communities are somewhat now united, and this is where the show enters the post-Rick Grimes era, after episode 5 that is. Now, the obvious pick for worst character in Season 9 is Henry. He was a character I grew quite fond of in the previous seasons, until his stupidity in Season 9. He just kept making idiotic decisions for a girl he'd known about 48 hours, Which, say what you want, but sneaking off and stalking the Whisperer's camp, one of the most formidable villain groups we've ever seen, is just a completely brain-dead move. He was just so frustrating to watch as a character. I mean, he'd been trained by Morgan in the art of Aikido and had heaps of potential, but he just died in Season 9, mostly down to his own stupid actions. But my actual pick for worst character in Season 9 is Maggie Rhee, and it mainly comes down to her obsession with killing Negan. She is just so fixated on revenge that she essentially isolated Hilltop from trading with the Kingdom and Alexandria for years, all because she was bitter that Rick spared a man's life. Now, albeit I know that man killed her husband, but still. I mean, the character assassination from the writers is low-key crazy, because she is inadvertently the reason Rick had to blow up the bridge and leave the show. And the writers knew Andrew Lincoln wanted to leave the show, so even putting the character in that situation, knowing the divide it would cause amongst the fanbase, infuriates me. Maggie as a character didn't deserve this, but she becomes this hard-headed, selfish character and essentially asks Rick to ignore his dying son's wishes. And if that's not bad enough, she then just vanishes out of the show with almost no explanation, as we later find out she's left to go and help a girl called Georgie with some mysterious community that we never see or hear about. It feels so abrupt and unsatisfying, and when her people are getting absolutely massacred by the Whisperers, she is nowhere to be seen. She doesn't even reply to the letters they send her. And to put the cherry on top of all of this, she didn't even kill Negan when she got the chance. So all the years of isolation and the bitterness were pretty much for nothing. And I'm a huge fan of Maggie in the earlier seasons, but Season 9, she is just unbearable. With a load of characters departing the show, such as Rick, Michonne and Maggie, Season 9 gave us an abundance of new characters. However, in Season 10, many of these new characters just got pushed to the background, making their introductions feel pretty pointless. Connie is the only new character that I actually cared about, as she had a good and meaningful relationship with Daryl. As for Luke, Magna and Yumiko, they are all pretty forgettable, as they just have nothing really to do in this season, and it makes their introductions pretty meaningless. I mean, I just don't get why the writers made such a conscious effort in the previous season to give them so much screen time, just to do a complete 180 in this season and have them basically do nothing. So for me, they are up there with the worst characters in Season 10. But again, with another controversial take, I'm going to have to choose Carol. Now, Carol is one of my favourite characters in the entire show, but much like Maggie from Season 9, she regresses massively in this one season. Throughout the series, Carol had been portrayed as a strong, resourceful and emotionally complex woman, but perhaps her biggest attribute was her rational thinking. However, in Season 10, all of these just go out the window, as she makes reckless and rash decisions that quite frankly would have gotten her killed if she didn't have an immense amount of plot armor. This sudden erratic behaviour from Carol seems extremely out of character, and I know it was a retaliation to Henry's death, but she just kept putting herself and others in very dangerous positions. I mean, even one of the greatest friendships in fiction, that being Carol and Daryl, is shaky in Season 10. Their relationship felt strained and unnecessarily dramatic, largely due to Carol's self-destructive behaviour. And this storyline just dragged on for so long. And after the sheer amount of screen time given to Carol and her internal struggles, she doesn't even get to kill Alpha herself. Meaning from Carol's aspect, there really isn't that much of a payoff for this storyline. I do like the fact we delved into her guilt and took time to look into her mental state, but ultimately it dragged on for ages. And it felt like the writers were heavily relying on Carol to carry the narrative of Season 10, due to her being one of the last OGs left in the show. And ultimately, in my opinion, this just doesn't work. Carol is so phenomenal throughout many of the other seasons that I think it makes Season 10 Carol stick out like a sore thumb. But for me, that's why Carol is the worst character in Season 10. Season 11 is the final installment from the Walking Dead main series, and it's here we see the Commonwealth adapted from the comics. And again, in Season 11 we meet a lot of new characters, and many of them kind of fall short of the mark if I'm totally honest. Lance Hornsby seems like a cartoonish villain to me, and his actions feel forced to drive the story forward rather than make any sense. I mean, Lance could have been this fascinating morally grey character, but he never receives the necessary depth or backstory to support his very extreme actions. But the worst character in season 11 for me is Pamela Milton. Pamela is introduced as the leader of the Commonwealth, a privileged and politically elite society, but beyond being the daughter of a former US president, we never get much insight into who she actually is or how she rose to power, or even why she believes in the hierarchical system. So ultimately she comes off more like a symbol rather than a fully realised character. I mean, I wanted the show to delve into how the Commonwealth was created, and how they'd essentially remained untouched for all of these years. But my biggest problem with Pamela, and the overall Commonwealth storyline as a whole, is it felt so incredibly underwhelming. The Walking Dead is notorious for some of the best villains in fiction. Shane, Negan, the Governor, they are all superb. But the Commonwealth and Pamela as villains are extremely generic. The villains I just mentioned all had layered motivations and personal demons, and most importantly served a real threat to our protagonists. Pamela doesn't have any of this. There's little moral complexity or internal conflict shown, even as her society starts to fall apart, and you never feel like any of our characters are in any real danger. But with those two, it felt like at any second they would either snipe or beat one of our beloved characters to death, which made every single scene with them in so incredibly tense. But Pamela just doesn't have this effect. Now, I know this word is thrown around a lot these days, but she just lacks that aura that the other villains in the show had. And as the final villain of the show, I just wanted to see so much more from her and the Commonwealth. Because in general, the Commonwealth arc had potential to explore real-world themes like class inequality, propaganda, and post-apocalyptic politics in a fresh new way. But Pamela doesn't drive that discussion, she just represents the establishment and class. She could have been a compelling antagonist who truly believed what she was doing was right, but instead she's like a generic cartoon sneezy politician, and I don't think the character's awful, but she is the worst character in season 11 in my opinion. But with that being said, these are my least favourite characters from every single season of the Walking Dead main show. Again, this is just my opinion, so I would love to hear your guys' takes in the comments, as I'm sure I will be catching a lot of flack, especially for the Maggie and Carol selections. But if you enjoyed today's video, please do like and subscribe, as it really helps the channel out, and I'll see you all next time. Goodbye.